The story of HMS Queen Mary is an interesting but unfortunate tale. This was the last British battlecruiser completed before the Great War, a transitional design between HMS Lion and HMS Tiger, one of the most powerful of her type, and a ship that had very little chance to show it. Queen Mary would only see 2 direct battles, and the second one, Jutland, is what this ship will forever be known for. She was the largest loss that day, and her explosive fate is very well known. That isn't to say it's all there is to her story, of course. Queen Mary has an interesting design that sets her apart from Lion, and the ship was an important part of the Royal Navy's fleet for as long as she lasted, as we'll see in today's video. Let's begin with the differences in design between Queen Mary and Lion, which are actually fewer than you might think. Lion launched in 1910. Queen Mary was only laid down in March 1911. Because of this delay, improvements could be made to the design. Most of those changes weren't immediately visible. Queen Mary's beam was slightly increased to 89 feet and 1 inch, or 27.2 meters. In comparison, Lion had a beam of 88 feet and 6.75 inches. That is a very slight difference. And there was no notable difference in length, with both designs reaching 700 feet or 213 meters, at least in overall length. Roberts cites a very slight difference of less than an inch. The second change, meanwhile, relates to the main battery. Queen Mary adopted a heavier shell. This resulted in the 13.5-inch Mark 5H gun, and a new mounting to go along with it. Not a visible change, but a notable one. A visual change came in the superstructure. That was changed slightly on Queen Mary, with the biggest difference coming in the secondary battery. Lion had carried a pair of 4-inch guns, a deck above the rest. On Queen Mary, that pair was moved down to an expanded forecastle deck, putting all 8 casements on the same level, which leaves 2 visual changes to note. First, the second funnel. This was slightly wider than on Lion, while also being slightly shorter in length. The height, on the other hand, was the exact same. As for the last visual difference, that ties into the largest internal change on Queen Mary's design. That's the stern walkway that you can see here. Queen Mary is only longer than Lion if you count this, and not the actual hull, from all the sources I have available. In any case, this was something very common on older British capital ships, but missing on Lion. That's because this was tied to the officer quarters. If you think back to the Age of Sail, you'll probably think of the big stern quarters, often quite fancy with their windows and paint. Well, starting with Dreadnought, the British had moved officer cabins to the amidships section. This was unpopular, shall we say. The new quarters were closer to auxiliary machinery, although this did vary between ships. This resulted in noisier and more cramped conditions than the officers might have expected. As far as battlecruisers are concerned, this was reversed on Queen Mary. The officer quarters went back to the stern, and the stern walk was restored. In terms of combat capability, this wasn't a big change. This does mostly round off the design changes, however. There were some changes in the distribution of the armor protection, but not the actual thickness. And the ship had more powerful turbines than Lion, but this wasn't a major increase. As you can see, while there were changes, they are not massive. About what you expect when you're starting from the same basic design. In any event, since that rounds off Queen Mary's design changes, let's move on. I'll briefly run down the detailed design before shifting to service. We'll begin with the displacement. On Queen Mary, this came out to 27,200 tons at the normal loading, with this going up to around 32,150 at the deep load. For comparison, Lion came out to 31,300 tons at her own deep loading. On that displacement, Queen Mary carried a heavy broadside, 4 twin turrets, all carried on the centerline. These were the same weapons on the same layout as on HMS Lion. A super-firing pair on the bow, and a midships turret between the second and third funnel, and a final turret on the stern. Each of these turrets carried two 13.5-inch, 343mm guns, a total of 8 barrels. The secondary battery, meanwhile, consisted of 16 single, 4-inch, or 102mm guns. As mentioned earlier, Queen Mary carried 8 of these guns in casements on her forward superstructure. The other 8, for their part, were carried in similar mountings on the aft superstructure. Weaponry was rounded off at this point by 2 submerged 21-inch torpedo tubes, one on either broadside, and later in her service, the ship also picked up 2 anti-aircraft guns, a single 6-pounder Hotchkiss gun and a single 3-inch gun. Now let's look at the armor protection. This consisted of a 9-inch thick main belt that thinned down to 4 inches towards the bow and stern, although it didn't quite reach the ends of the ship. In addition, Queen Mary also had a 6-inch thick upper belt that thinned down to 5 inches when it reached the turrets. The deck armor, for its part, came out to 2.5 inches at its thickest. Which brings us to speed to round things off. That came out to around 28 knots on 75,000 shaft horsepower. That's 5,000 more than the 70,000 shaft horsepower on Lion, still provided by a frankly absurd number of boilers, that being 42 in all, driving 2 turbines and 4 shafts. And now with that finished, we can talk service. A longer lead up than usual, but there was more to cover. That aside, Queen Mary's story began on March 6, 1911, when she was laid down by Palmer's Shipbuilding. Beyond this point, the construction went quickly. A little over a year later, on March 20th, 1912, Queen Mary was in the water. And then, a bit over a year later, she was commissioned, on September 4th, 1913, making her the last British battlecruiser completed and in service before the Great War kicked off. However, this didn't mean a lot. Queen Mary, named for the wife of King George V, had a very short peacetime career. She would work up and train her crew while making a visit to Brest in February of 1914, and then Russia in June. Not much of note, really. The more important aspect, beyond any specific events, was the training. Tiger is notorious for how ill-trained her crew was due to entering service during the war. Queen Mary only had a few months of peacetime, but it did matter in this regard. In any event, soon after the ship returned from Russia, war would arrive. When that war started in July 1914, Queen Mary was in Britain as part of the 1st Battlecruiser Squadron. This force would see the first naval action of the war in late August of 1914, the First Battle of Heligoland Bight. This came about from a British plan to ambush patrolling German destroyers and cruisers. Scouting missions had picked up on the Germans routinely patrolling their coast, so a plan was put together to ambush that patrol, using submarines, destroyers, light cruisers, and the battle cruisers. As the British light forces engaged their German counterparts, the battle cruisers performed distant cover, at first. As German cruisers began to engage the British force, the capital ships moved in. They came to the rescue of the damaged HMS Arethusa, engaging two German light cruisers, SMS Strasbourg and SMS Kulm. The former managed to duck into fog, while the latter was crippled by the battlecruisers. Soon after, another old cruiser appeared and was dispatched by British gunfire. In this action, Queen Mary performed well, although she didn't particularly stand out either. It was, in a way, battlecruisers doing what people expect them to do, sending lighter cruisers to the bottom. Although it was quite risky sailing into such close proximity to the German coast. As for the German heavy forces, they were delayed by low tide and failed to engage. Queen Mary and her companions would return home to a hero's welcome, and for at least a time, nothing much of note. The next major action for Queen Mary didn't come until December 15th, 1914, and that's for a certain value of major and action. This was the second raid on the British coast, one of several attempts by the Germans to draw out the Grand Fleet and engage it piecemeal to weaken the British force. While the two fleets danced around each other, they never came to blows. Queen Mary would be with the other battlecruisers as they missed the Germans. As a result, Queen Mary didn't get the chance to engage her German counterparts. The same thing would happen in 1915. When the Battle of Dogger Bank arrived on January 24th, 1915, Queen Mary was in dock for refit, something that ran through January and February of 1915. This was routine maintenance that all ships needed. It was just Queen Mary's luck to be in port during the first battlecruiser on battlecruiser engagement. Doubly unfortunate when you take into account how quiet that year was for the big fleets, outside of Dogger Bank. Queen Mary, much like the other splendid cats, was held close to home, and for the rest of 1915 saw no action against the Germans, just lots and lots of training and patrol duty, along with the odd refit, such as the addition of a main battery director in December. If you want to look at it this way, 1915 was the metaphorical calm before the storm, at least for Queen Mary. This would continue into early 1916 before everything changed at the end of May. On May 31st, 1916, Queen Mary joined the rest of the Grand Fleet to intercept the High Seas Fleet, based on decoded radio messages. This interception would result in the Battle of Jutland. Queen Mary's role in this action would prove short and explosive. Under Admiral Beatty's command, the British battlecruisers, aside from 3 in the 3rd Battlecruiser Squadron, ran into their German counterparts. This began both the Greater Battle of Jutland and the run to the south. For Queen Mary, she began the action around 3:50 p.m. by opening fire on SMS Seydlitz. This came a couple minutes after the Germans opened fire. At this point, the two fleets were still converging. As a result, Queen Mary could only fire her bow guns. A few minutes later, however, the British changed course to bring more guns to bear. The range was closing in, and British fire became more accurate. Queen Mary, in particular, landed 2 hits on Seydlitz between 3:55 and 3:57. Further maneuvering would see Lion hit by German fire, the famous hit to her Q turret that could very well have sunk her, had it not been for heroism by Major Francis Harvey in flooding the magazine. For this video, what matters is that the smoke from Lion's fires obscured the ship. Fire shifted to Queen Mary. Now focused by Seydlitz and Derflinger, the battlecruiser shuddered under repeated hits. Her armor held up at first, aside from losing the right-hand gun from her Q turret. However, Queen Mary's luck would run out at 4:26 p.m. Her forward magazines detonated under enemy fire, breaking the ship in two. Later sources will cite the secondary magazine going up first, and this setting off the main magazine. Debris from the explosion, and another as she sank, landed on HMS Tiger. That ship was forced to sheer away to avoid running into Queen Mary's remains. Exactly how many men survived is a matter of debate. Various sources will give various figures. I've seen as high as 20, with 18 picked up by the British and 2 by the Germans. I've also seen only 8 survivors listed. That figure, for what it's worth, seems to be the more common. In any event, it's here where HMS Queen Mary's short life came to its fiery end. Thank you for watching. Remember to like, comment, and subscribe if you enjoy the content, and I'll see you in the next one.